Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary stories come to life. If you've subscribed for more stories, enjoy the ride now. The electromagnetic storm hit Kepler 186f with the subtlety of an angry god throwing lightning bolts at anything foolish enough to be caught in the open. Jake Mitchell had approximately 15 seconds between the first ominous rumble of ionized atmosphere and the realization that his geological survey equipment was about to become very expensive scrap metal unless he found shelter immediately. He sprinted across the rocky plateau, his boots slipping on the increasingly slick stone as the first wave of electrocharged precipitation began to fall. The droplets stung like tiny electric needles, and his tablet was already displaying concerning warnings about electromagnetic interference that could permanently damage its delicate circuits. The cave opening appeared just as Jake was beginning to consider the unpleasant possibility of spending the next several hours huddled under a tarp while lightning tried to turn him into a human conductor. It wasn't a large entrance. Just a dark gash in the cliff face that looked deep enough to provide adequate shelter, but it was definitely better than being the tallest object on an exposed plateau during an electrical storm. Jake dove through the opening just as the sky erupted in a display of natural fury that would have been spectacular if he weren't in danger of being electrocuted by it. He landed hard on smooth stone, rolling to avoid crushing his equipment, and lay there for a moment catching his breath while the storm raged outside. Well, he muttered to himself, sitting up and brushing grit off his survey gear, that was unnecessarily dramatic. It was only when his eyes adjusted to the dim interior that Jake realized his refuge was not the natural cave he had expected. The walls were too smooth, too deliberately shaped, and there was a soft blue-green glow emanating from somewhere deeper in the cave that definitely wasn't geological in origin. Also, he was sitting in a puddle of muddy water in what was clearly someone's living room. The furniture was carved from the same stone as the walls, but polished to a warm shine and arranged with obvious care around a central area where crystalline formations provided gentle illumination. There were shelves built into the rock faces, holding objects that looked both functional and artistic. In one corner, he could see what appeared to be a sophisticated hydroponic garden growing under panels of softly glowing organic material. And he was dripping dirty water all over everything. "Oh, no," Jake said aloud, scrambling to his feet and looking around in horror at the small lake he was creating on what was obviously a meticulously maintained floor. "No, no, no. This is someone's home." "Yes," said a voice from the shadows, "it is." Jake spun around, nearly losing his balance on the wet stone, to find himself facing the owner of the voice. She stepped into the blue-green light with fluid grace, and Jake's first coherent thought was that she was definitely not human. She was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with silver hair that seemed to catch and hold the cave's ambient light. Her skin had a pale, luminescent quality, marked with delicate silver patterns that traced along her arms and disappeared beneath clothing that appeared to be woven from some sort of iridescent fiber. Her eyes were larger than human standard, colored a deep violet that seemed to shift with the light, and her ears were elegantly pointed and slightly elongated. She was also clearly not pleased to find a muddy human in her living room. "I am so sorry," Jake said immediately, holding up his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent. "I was caught in the storm, and I thought this was just a natural cave. I didn't realize anyone lived here. I'll leave immediately." He turned toward the entrance, but the sound of the storm outside made it clear that "immediately" might not be a viable option. The electromagnetic discharge was so intense that the air itself seemed to be crackling with energy, and the occasional flash of lightning illuminated sheets of rain that were falling with enough force to strip paint. The alien woman, for lack of a better term, followed his gaze toward the cave mouth and made a sound that might have been either amusement or resignation. "You will be electrocuted before you travel 50 meters, she observed, her voice carrying an accent that sounded like it might be from somewhere in the general vicinity of Alpha Centauri. "The storm will continue for several hours." Jake looked back at her, torn between embarrassment at his intrusion and gratitude for her apparent lack of homicidal intent toward uninvited guests. "I really don't want to impose. Maybe I could just wait by the entrance. I promise I won't touch anything else." "You are already touching everything," she pointed out reasonably, gesturing at the spreading puddle around his feet. And you are shivering. Jake looked down at himself and realized she was right. His clothes were soaked through, he was indeed shivering from the cold, and he was continuing to drip water onto her floor with every movement. I could try to mop this up, he offered weakly. The alien woman studied him for a long moment, her violet eyes taking in his bedraggled appearance, the expensive geological equipment he was clutching protectively, and the genuine distress on his face at having invaded her space. You are a surveyor, she said. It wasn't a question. Geological surveyor, yes. Jake Mitchell. He shifted his grip on his equipment to free one hand, then realized he probably shouldn't try to shake hands with someone whose home he had just flooded. I'm working on a mineral assessment of the southern continent. I wasn't expecting the storm to move this fast. Electromagnetic storms on this world are unpredictable, she replied. The ionosphere interacts with the magnetic field in ways that your weather satellites cannot accurately model. Jake blinked. You know about weather satellites? I know about many things. She paused, then seemed to come to some internal decision. I am Zara Thel'nara. This is my home, which you have thoroughly irrigated. Again, I'm really sorry about that. If there's anything I can do to help clean up. There is. Zara moved to a carved storage unit and retrieved what appeared to be an absorbent cloth. Remove your wet clothing. You are creating more water damage with every moment you remain in those garments. Jake's face flushed red. What? Your garments are saturated. They are dripping continuously onto my floor. Logic suggests removing them. Zara's expression was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather rather than his state of dress. I have spare clothing that will fit you adequately. That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly. You will contract hypothermia if you remain in wet clothing in this temperature, Zara interrupted. You will also continue flooding my living space. Neither outcome is acceptable. Jake looked down at the expanding puddle, then at Zara, then at the storm raging outside. The logical part of his mind acknowledged that she was absolutely right on all counts. The part of his mind that had been raised with concepts like modesty and not getting naked in strangers' homes was having a mild panic attack. Could I maybe just step outside the cave entrance to change? He asked hopefully. Zara looked at him as if he had suggested setting himself on fire for warmth. The electromagnetic discharge would kill you. Right. Jake took a deep breath. Okay. Could you maybe turn around? Zara's pointed ears twitched in what might have been amusement. I will retrieve suitable clothing from my stores. She disappeared into the deeper recesses of the cave, leaving Jake alone with his embarrassment and the sound of the storm. He quickly stripped out of his soaked clothing, wringing out as much water as possible and laying the garments on the stone floor where they could drain without causing further flooding. When Zara returned, she was carrying what appeared to be a long, tunic-style garment and loose-fitting pants made from the same iridescent material as her own clothing. She set them down without looking directly at Jake, which he appreciated. These will be large on you, she said, but they will provide adequate warmth and coverage. Jake pulled on the borrowed clothes, which were indeed quite large. Apparently Zara's people were taller than humans on average, but surprisingly comfortable. The fabric felt soft and warm against his skin, and there was something about the weave that seemed to regulate temperature automatically. Thank you, he said sincerely. This is incredibly generous, especially considering I just broke into your home and flooded your floor. You did not break in, Zara replied, turning back to face him now that he was clothed. You sought shelter from a dangerous storm. That is survival behavior, not criminal activity. She moved to another storage area and retrieved cleaning supplies, then began efficiently mopping up the water Jake had tracked in. Jake immediately moved to help, but she waved him away. You do not know the proper technique for maintaining the stone's finish, she said. Please, sit by the warming crystals. You are still suffering from temperature shock. Jake looked around and spotted the crystals she mentioned, a cluster of clear, faceted stones that radiated gentle heat. He settled himself nearby, grateful for the warmth, and watched Zara work with the efficient precision of someone who had maintained this space for a considerable time. "How long have you lived here?" he asked, partly out of curiosity and partly to fill the awkward silence. 3 years, 4 months, 18 days, Zara replied without hesitation. "That's very precise. I keep detailed records." She finished mopping and stored the cleaning supplies with the same methodical care. "It helps maintain psychological stability during extended solitude." Jake filed that information away with growing interest. "You live here alone?" "By choice." Zara's tone suggested this was not a topic she wished to explore further. Outside, the storm continued its electromagnetic tantrum, and Jake realized he was going to be sharing this space with his enigmatic host for several more hours at minimum. He looked around the cave again, noting the careful arrangement, the obvious intelligence behind the design, and the subtle beauty of a space that had been crafted with both functionality and aesthetics in mind. "It's beautiful," he said honestly. "I mean, aside from the part where I flooded it. The way you've integrated the living areas with the natural rock formations, it's incredible." Zara paused in her tidying, glancing at him with what might have been surprise. "You appreciate the architectural design?" "I'm a geologist," Jake replied. "I spend most of my time thinking about rock formations and structural integrity. This is, well, it's probably the most impressive adaptation of natural cave systems I've ever seen." For the first time since he had invaded her home, Zara's expression shifted from polite tolerance to something approaching interest. "You understand geological principles?" "It's literally my job." Jake gestured toward his equipment, which was still drying near the warming crystals. "I'm mapping subsurface mineral distributions and analyzing structural stability for potential mining operations." "Mining?" Zara's tone cooled noticeably. "Responsible mining," Jake added quickly, sensing he had stepped into dangerous conversational territory. "Environmental impact assessments, sustainable extraction protocols, that sort of thing. Though honestly, most of what I find just goes into academic papers that 5 people read." Zara studied him for a long moment, then moved to what appeared to be a food preparation area carved into one wall of the cave. "Are you hungry?" The change of subject was so abrupt that Jake needed a moment to process it. Yes, actually. I haven't eaten since this morning." "I will prepare food. The storm will continue for some time, and you will require proper nutrition if you are to survive the night without compromising your immune system." As Zara began preparing what smelled like an incredibly complex and delicious meal, Jake settled back against the warming crystals and tried to process the surreal turn his day had taken. He had sought shelter from a storm and accidentally discovered what might be the most fascinating person he had encountered in years. Even if she was alien, isolated, and probably regretting her hospitality with every passing minute. The meal Zara prepared defied every preconception Jake had about cave-dwelling and alien cuisine. She worked with ingredients from her hydroponic garden, combining them with what appeared to be cultivated fungi and proteins from sources he couldn't identify but were definitely more complex than simple foraging. The result was a stew that tasted like it had been crafted by someone with both advanced biochemical knowledge and genuine culinary skill. "This is incredible," Jake said after his 3rd spoonful, no longer caring that enthusiasm might be impolite. "The flavor profiles are unlike anything I've experienced. Is this traditional Velshera cuisine?" Zara paused with her own spoon halfway to her mouth. "You know my species designation?" "Well, no," Jake admitted. "You mentioned your name earlier, Zara Thel'nara. The linguistic structure suggests that Thel is a family or clan identifier, and Nara sounds like it might be a generational marker. I figured Velshera was probably your species name based on the phonetic patterns. You derived my species from linguistic analysis." Zara's violet eyes widened slightly. "During casual conversation?" Jake felt his face warm with embarrassment. "Sorry. Occupational hazard." When you spend months alone with rock samples, you develop some unusual mental habits. I tend to overanalyze patterns in everything. That is, remarkably astute. Zara set down her spoon, studying him with renewed interest. Most species require formal introduction to cultural identification protocols. Most people don't spend their days trying to determine the geological history of planets based on mineral distribution patterns, Jake replied. Pattern recognition kinda becomes automatic after a while. As they continued eating, Jake found himself relaxing despite the bizarre circumstances. Zara was an excellent cook, the warming crystals created a comfortable ambient temperature, and the storm outside had transformed from immediate threat to distant background noise. So, he said carefully, you mentioned living here by choice. Are there other Vel'Shera on the planet? Zara's expression grew guarded. There were. They departed 18 months ago when the long-range surveys concluded. But you stayed. I stayed. She took another spoonful of stew, clearly debating how much to reveal. My people prioritize collective harmony above individual perspective. I found this, philosophically limiting. Jake recognized the tone of someone who had made difficult choices about belonging and identity. Philosophical differences can be tough. Especially when they're with people who matter to you. You speak from experience. Divorced, Jake said simply. My ex-wife thought I was too focused on work, too willing to disappear into research projects, not emotionally available enough for a proper relationship. She wasn't wrong, exactly, but I never figured out how to be the person she wanted me to be without stopping being the person I actually am. Zara nodded slowly. The Vel'Shera believe that individual desires should be subordinated to collective needs. That personal research interests should serve community goals rather than individual curiosity. That questioning established protocols indicates psychological instability. Ouch. Jake winced in sympathy. Let me guess, you asked inconvenient questions about why things were done certain ways. I suggested that our survey methods might be improved by incorporating geological analysis techniques from other species. I proposed collaboration with human research teams to expand our understanding of planetary systems. Zara's voice carried old frustration. The response was not positive. So you chose exile over conformity. I chose authenticity over acceptance, Zara corrected. Though the practical result is the same. Jake looked around the cave again, noting details he had missed earlier. The hydroponic systems weren't just functional, they were experimental. Different sections contained various growing mediums, lighting configurations, and what appeared to be controlled environmental conditions for testing optimal cultivation parameters. You've been continuing your research, he observed. This isn't just a home, it's a laboratory. Zara followed his gaze, and for the first time her expression showed something approaching pride. I have been developing sustainable living techniques that could be adapted for long-term planetary habitation. Integration of biological and geological systems for maximum efficiency and minimal environmental impact. That's brilliant. Have you published any of your findings? Published where? The Vel'Shera academic community considers me unreliable, and I lack the proper credentials for most interspecies research platforms. Jake sat back, beginning to understand the full scope of Zara's situation. She was a talented researcher whose work had no outlet, whose innovations were being developed in isolation, whose discoveries might never be shared with anyone who could appreciate their significance. You know, he said slowly, I might be able to help with the publication problem. Zara's ears perked forward with obvious interest. How? I have connections with several geological journals that accept interdisciplinary submissions. If your sustainable habitat research includes geological components, and it obviously does, based on what I can see here, we might be able to frame it as environmental geology with biotechnological applications. You would collaborate with someone you met 6 hours ago. I would collaborate with someone whose work is clearly innovative and whose perspective could contribute significantly to sustainable development research, Jake corrected. The timeline of our acquaintance is irrelevant to the quality of your ideas. Zara stared at him for a long moment, then began to laugh. The sound was musical, with harmonics that seemed to resonate with the cave's acoustics in ways that human laughter wouldn't. "What's funny?" Jake asked, though he was smiling in response to her obvious amusement. "You invaded my home, flooded my floor, and now you are offering to help advance my career. This is not typical behavior for uninvited guests. Well, you fed me incredible food and provided me with dry clothes instead of throwing me back into the storm. This is not typical behavior for unwilling hosts. Perhaps we are both atypical." As the evening progressed, Jake found himself drawn into discussions about geological formations, sustainable ecosystems, and the fascinating intersection of biological and mineral processes that Zara had been exploring. Her knowledge was impressive, combining theoretical understanding with practical application in ways that demonstrated both intelligence and creativity. The calcium carbonate deposits in the deeper cave systems, Zara explained, leading him to a section of the cave he hadn't seen before, can be cultivated to grow in specific patterns that create natural filtration systems for water processing. Jake examined the formations she showed him, recognizing the mineral structures but seeing them applied in ways he had never considered. "This is incredible. You're using geological processes as biotechnology. The applications for off-world settlements would be enormous." "That was my intention. Long-term space habitation requires sustainable systems that can function independently of supply chains from home worlds." "Exactly. And if you could scale this up." Jake's mind raced with possibilities. "Zara, this could revolutionize how we approach planetary colonization." She looked at him with an expression of cautious hope. "You genuinely believe my work has value?" "I believe your work is groundbreaking. The fact that you developed it in isolation, without institutional support or collaborative resources, makes it even more impressive." As they made their way back to the main living area, Jake realized that his earlier embarrassment about intruding had been replaced by something else entirely: fascination, intellectual excitement, and a growing appreciation for the remarkable person who had turned a chance encounter into an evening of discovery. "Zara," he said as they settled back by the warming crystals, "I know this is presumptuous, but would you be interested in showing me more of your research tomorrow? I mean, if the storm clears and if you don't mind having an audience for your work." "You wish to extend your stay?" Zara's tone was carefully neutral, but Jake thought he detected something hopeful in her expression. "I wish to learn more about what you've accomplished here. And maybe see if there's a way I can help you share it with the scientific community that should be studying and building on your innovations." Zara was quiet for a long moment, gazing at the soft light from her bioluminescent plants. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "It has been a very long time since someone expressed genuine interest in my work. It has been a long time since I met someone whose work was this interesting," Jake replied honestly. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cave, two isolated researchers had found something neither had expected: someone who understood that the most important discoveries often happened when you were willing to ask different questions and explore unexpected connections. And as Jake settled onto the sleeping mat Zara had prepared for him, he found himself hoping the storm would take its time clearing. Jake woke to the sound of Zara moving quietly through the cave, tending to her various systems with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected a complex daily routine. The storm outside had diminished to occasional rumbles of thunder, but the electromagnetic readings on his equipment suggested it wasn't safe to venture out yet. "Good morning," Zara said when she noticed he was awake. "I have prepared a morning meal. Your clothing should be dry within the hour." "Thank you for everything." Jake stretched, surprised to realize he had slept better than he had in weeks. "I hope I didn't disrupt your routine too much." "Actually," Zara said, and there was something almost shy in her tone, "it was pleasant to prepare food for someone other than myself. I had forgotten how much I enjoy sharing meals." As they ate breakfast, a complex grain dish with cultivated fruits that tasted like a cross between citrus and something entirely alien, Jake found himself studying the intricate details of Zara's home with professional interest. The air circulation system, he said, noting the subtle movement of air through carved channels in the walls. It's integrated with the natural thermal dynamics of the cave structure, isn't it? Zara nodded, clearly pleased that he had noticed. The limestone formations create natural convection patterns. I simply enhanced the existing airflow with strategic modifications to the rock face. That's ingenious. You're using the geological structure as environmental control infrastructure. Jake set down his spoon, excitement building. Zara, this has massive applications for underground habitation systems. Mining colonies, research stations, emergency shelters. I have detailed documentation of the modification techniques, she said. Including thermal efficiency calculations and structural integrity assessments. Could I see them? I mean, if you're comfortable sharing your research data with someone you've known for less than 24 hours. Zara's ears twitched with what Jake was learning to recognize as amusement. You realize that your enthusiasm for geological applications is somewhat unusual among the visitors I have had. How many visitors have you had? Including you? 1. Jake laughed. Well, I'm honored to be your first research audience. Though I have to ask, don't you get lonely living here by yourself? Zara was quiet for a moment, focusing on her breakfast with more attention than it required. Loneliness is preferable to the alternative I experienced with my people. At least solitude is honest about what it offers. What do you mean? Among the Velshera, I was surrounded by others but constantly aware that my thoughts, my interests, my questions were unwelcome. I was lonely in crowds, isolated by the need to suppress everything that made me, me. She looked up at him with an expression of careful vulnerability. Here, I am alone, but I am authentic. I prefer that form of isolation. Jake recognized the feeling she was describing with uncomfortable clarity. I understand that more than you might think. My marriage, toward the end, I felt more alone when my wife was in the room than I did working by myself in remote locations. Because you had to pretend to be someone else. Because I had to apologize for being someone she couldn't love. Jake hadn't meant to share something so personal, but Zara's honesty seemed to call for equal openness. I kept trying to figure out how to be less interested in my work, less focused on research, less me. But I never managed it. And now? Now I work alone and tell myself it's by choice. Jake smiled ruefully. Though yesterday, when I was caught in that storm, I realized it had been 3 weeks since I'd had a real conversation with another person. I was starting to talk to my equipment, which probably isn't a healthy sign. Zara laughed, the musical sound filling the cave with warmth. I have been conducting detailed discussions with my hydroponic systems for months. They are excellent listeners, though their conversational contributions are limited. Maybe that's what we both need, Jake suggested. Someone who actually talks back. After breakfast, Zara led him on a comprehensive tour of her research installations. What Jake had initially seen as a comfortable living space revealed itself to be a sophisticated laboratory complex integrated seamlessly with the natural cave system. The deeper chambers contain my primary experimental areas, she explained, guiding him through passages that opened into rooms carved with precision engineering. Mineral cultivation studies, soil composition analysis, atmospheric processing experiments. Jake moved through the spaces with growing amazement. Each chamber served multiple functions, with living areas flowing into workspaces that connected to storage areas that doubled as additional research facilities. The integration was so complete that it was impossible to determine where the home ended and the laboratory began. This is incredible, Zara. You've created a completely self-sustaining research facility. The efficiency ratios alone. He paused, examining a wall covered with charts and data displays. How long did this take you to design and implement? 2 years for the initial construction, another year for optimization and expansion. She moved to one of the displays, pointing out various systems integration charts. The most challenging aspect was balancing residential comfort with laboratory functionality while maintaining minimal environmental impact. And you did this all by yourself? I had extensive engineering training before I chose exile, Zara said. And significant motivation to prove that sustainable habitat design could be achieved without compromising research capabilities. Jake spent the next several hours examining Zara's work in detail, asking questions about structural engineering, resource management, and long-term sustainability protocols. Her answers revealed not just technical competence but innovative thinking that approached problems from angles he wouldn't have considered. The waste processing system is particularly elegant, he observed, studying the closed-loop resource management she had designed. You're achieving near-perfect efficiency in a system that most engineers would consider impossibly complex. Complexity is relative, Zara replied. Natural ecosystems manage similar resource loops with far greater intricacy. I simply applied ecological principles to technological problems. That's exactly what makes this groundbreaking. You're thinking like a biologist, an engineer, and a geologist simultaneously. Jake looked up from the technical specifications he was reviewing. Zara, this work needs to be published. It needs to be studied and replicated and built upon by teams across the galaxy. You have mentioned publication several times, she said carefully. Are you certain your academic connections would consider research from an exiled alien worthy of serious consideration? I'm certain they would consider research of this caliber essential reading, regardless of its source. Jake's conviction was absolute. The sustainability applications alone would make this significant, but the integration of multiple disciplines, the innovation in resource management, the practical demonstrations of theoretical concepts, this is the kind of work that changes how we approach habitat engineering. Zara was quiet for a long moment, then moved to another display showing her most recent experimental results. I have been working on atmospheric processing techniques that could terraform unsuitable environments using minimal external resources. Jake examined the data, his excitement building with each chart he reviewed. Zara, this is revolutionary. You're not just creating sustainable habitats, you're creating systems that could make uninhabitable worlds livable. The theoretical applications are extensive, she agreed. Though practical implementation would require significant collaboration and resources I do not currently possess. But that could change. Jake turned to face her, his mind racing with possibilities. If we could get this work published, if we could demonstrate the practical applications, if we could show the academic community what you've accomplished. You would assist with this? Even though it would require extended collaboration with someone your own species might consider unusual. Jake looked around the cave complex, taking in the remarkable integration of living space and laboratory, the innovative solutions to complex problems, the evidence of brilliant and creative thinking applied to practical challenges. Then he looked at Zara, whose violet eyes held equal measures of hope and wariness. Zara, he said seriously, working with you wouldn't be unusual. It would be the opportunity of a lifetime. As they made their way back to the main living area, Jake realized that his initial plan to complete his geological survey and return to Earth had been completely forgotten. Instead, he was thinking about extended research collaboration, co-authored papers, and the fascinating prospect of spending more time with someone who challenged his thinking and shared his passion for discovery. The storm appears to be clearing, Zara observed, checking her atmospheric monitoring systems. Jake looked toward the cave entrance, where late afternoon sunlight was beginning to filter through the dissipating clouds. He could leave now, return to his survey route, complete his assignment, and file his reports. Or he could stay and explore the most intriguing research opportunity he had ever encountered. Zara, he said, how would you feel about having a research partner? At least temporarily. Her ears perked forward with obvious interest. You would extend your stay? I would request assignment modification to conduct detailed collaborative research with a local expert in sustainable habitat development, Jake replied. If the local expert were interested in collaboration. Zara's smile was radiant. The local expert would find such collaboration highly appealing. 3 weeks later, Jake's emergency shelter had evolved into something neither he nor Zara had initially planned, but both were reluctant to define too precisely. His geological equipment had been integrated with her research systems, his communication array had been modified to include her in his official reports, and his sleeping area had somehow migrated from the guest space to a nook adjacent to her own quarters. The transformation hadn't been deliberate so much as inevitable, two people who had chosen solitude discovering that the right kind of companionship enhanced rather than compromised their independence. The mineral samples from Sector 12 show unusual crystalline structures, Jake reported, updating their shared research files while Zara prepared their evening meal. The lattice formation suggests some sort of biological influence during formation. Interesting, Zara replied, stirring something that smelled incredible and probably contained ingredients from at least 4 different experimental growing systems. The soil composition analysis from the same area indicated elevated levels of organic compounds that I could not identify. Maybe the crystals and the organics are related. We should plan a joint field expedition to collect integrated samples. It had become natural to speak in terms of we and our research and shared plans that extended weeks into the future. Jake no longer questioned when this had happened, only marveled at how seamlessly their individual work had merged into collaborative investigation. Jake, Zara said carefully, not turning from her cooking, your original assignment parameters were scheduled to conclude next week. Jake paused in his data analysis. The deadline had been looming in the back of his consciousness, a reality he had been avoiding by staying focused on the fascinating discoveries that emerged from their partnership daily. Yes, he said simply. Will you be returning to Earth? The question hung in the air between them, carrying implications that went far beyond professional collaboration. Jake set aside his tablet and really looked at Zara, at the way her silver markings seemed to glow more brightly when she was concentrating, at the graceful efficiency of her movements, at the subtle tension in her shoulders that suggested this conversation mattered more than her casual tone indicated. Do you want me to? He asked. I want you to choose what makes you happy, Zara replied, though her voice carried a note of carefully controlled emotion. Jake stood up and moved to where she was working, close enough to see the delicate patterns of luminescence that traced along her neck and disappeared beneath her clothing. Close enough to catch the subtle fragrance of her skin, which always carried hints of the bioluminescent plants she tended. Zara, he said softly, 3 weeks ago I was a divorced geologist who chose solitary assignments because relationships felt too complicated and demanding. I had convinced myself that I preferred being alone. She turned to face him, her violet eyes reflecting the soft light of the cave's illumination system. And now? She asked quietly. Now I know the difference between being alone by choice and being alone by default. I know what it feels like to share discoveries with someone who gets excited about the same things I do. I know what it's like to wake up looking forward to conversations about mineral formations and sustainable ecosystems and terrible jokes about geological processes. Jake reached out to touch her hand, marveling at the way her luminescent markings responded to contact with a soft pulse of light. I know what it feels like to be with someone who sees my passion for research as an asset rather than a character flaw, he continued. Someone who challenges my thinking, improves my work, and makes me want to be a better scientist and a better person. Zara's fingers intertwined with his, her skin warm and slightly textured in ways that were utterly alien and completely familiar. Your people will expect you to return, she said. Your career advancement, your professional obligations. My people sent me here to file geological reports and assess mineral resources, Jake interrupted. I can do that from anywhere. As for career advancement. Zara, the work we're doing together is the most significant research of my life. The papers we're preparing will advance sustainable development theory by decades. If that's not career advancement, I don't know what is. And personally? Zara's question was barely above a whisper. What do you want personally? Jake looked around the cave that had become more of a home in 3 weeks than his apartment on Earth had been in 3 years. He thought about the morning routine they had developed, the shared meals, the excited discussions that stretched late into the night, the comfortable silences while they worked on parallel research projects. He thought about the way Zara laughed at his geological humor, the way she listened to his theories with genuine interest, the way she had helped him understand that partnership could enhance individual strength rather than compromise it. Personally, he said, stepping closer to her, I want to wake up every morning knowing that someone brilliant and beautiful and impossibly accomplished wants to share her discoveries with me. I want to spend years mapping this planet with you, publishing research that changes how we think about sustainable development, maybe even expanding our investigations to other worlds. Years? Zara's ears perked forward with obvious hope. At least years. Possibly decades. Jake smiled. I'm thinking long-term research collaboration with options for permanent partnership, if my colleague is interested. Zara's answering smile was radiant enough to illuminate the entire cave complex. Your colleague finds the proposal extremely appealing. When she kissed him, Jake discovered that Velshera physiology included fascinating adaptations for enhanced sensory experience, and that the luminescent patterns on her skin responded to emotional stimuli in ways that were both alien and utterly captivating. So, she said sometime later, as they sat by the warming crystals sharing the dinner that had been temporarily abandoned, we are officially research partners. We are officially whatever we want to be, Jake replied. Though I should probably update my status with the survey office. Assignment extended indefinitely for collaborative research with local expert, should cover the professional aspects. And the personal aspects? Jake looked at this remarkable woman who had turned his accidental intrusion into the best thing that had ever happened to him, who had shown him that the right person could share your space without crowding your independence, who had proven that love didn't have to mean sacrifice if you found someone whose dreams complemented your own. The personal aspects, he said, pulling her closer, are that I love you. And I want to build a life that includes geological surveys and habitat research and terrible jokes about mineral formations and whatever other adventures we discover together. I love you too, Zara said simply. Though I should warn you that long-term cohabitation with me will involve extensive discussions about sustainable resource management and probably more experimental cuisine than most humans consider advisable. I should warn you that long-term cohabitation with me will involve obsessive data collection, spontaneous lectures about rock formations, and a tendency to get distracted by interesting mineral samples at inconvenient moments. Those sound like features, not problems. 6 months later, Jake submitted his final report to the Geological Survey Office, recommending the planet for protected research status rather than mining development. The recommendation was based on the presence of unique geological formations that warrant long-term scientific study, and the potential for developing revolutionary sustainable habitat technologies through collaboration with indigenous research specialists. The report did not mention that the indigenous research specialist was actually an exiled alien scientist who had become the love of his life, or that their collaborative research had expanded to include comprehensive life partnership and plans for permanent settlement. Some discoveries were too precious to share with bureaucrats. As Jake filed his final paperwork and officially resigned from the survey service to establish an independent research partnership with Dr. Zara Thel'nara, whose credentials he had helped establish through academic connections who cared more about innovative research than bureaucratic protocols, he reflected on the storm that had changed everything. He had sought shelter from electromagnetic discharge and found a home. He had invaded someone's carefully constructed solitude and been invited to stay forever. He had stumbled into the most unlikely partnership imaginable and discovered that sometimes the best relationships begin with someone apologizing for dripping water on your floor. The universe, Jake decided, had an excellent sense of humor and impeccable timing. And as he settled into the life he had never imagined but somehow always needed. Sharing daily discoveries with someone who understood that love could coexist with independence, that partnership could enhance rather than compromise individual passion, and that the most beautiful thing in the universe was finding someone who wanted to explore it with you, he was grateful for every drop of rain that had driven him into that cave. Some storms, it turned out, were blessings in disguise.